Welcome to the Consumer Code Show, where we believe that humans are incredible and we are living in a first era in history where behavioral data and AI have hit scale so we can go from consumer insight to business activation in no time. In this show, we explore the world of retail through the lens of demography, cartography, ethnography, and the economy. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. I want to kind of transition here to AGS. Can you give the audience a sense of what AGS does today to help retailers?
Well, we can flood you with data. We had started to expand our data offerings a few years back. So we now have something in the order of 60,000 attributes for every census block in the United States. 3,000 for Canada. We're working on that one. So we can drown you in data. But what we like to do is we don't want to just sell you data. We want to make sure that you know how to use it, that you're using it appropriately. We spend a lot of our time helping people understand the data and what to do with it. And we give that away. That's kind of the academic in me that says, I want people to understand what they're doing. And, somebody calls up and they'll say, hey, this is our problem. If we don't have the data for it and we can find it, we'll point you at it. We'll help you get it. We'll do whatever it is that we need to do. I'm really more about, I want people to use data and I want them to use it well and understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And, if we can make a decent living doing it, then we're all happy. And we are really in an aggressive kind of expansion mode. Expansion is the wrong word. I looked around 5-6 years ago and went, I'm really bored. I'm doing the same thing I was doing in 1985 1,000 times faster, but we're doing the same things. What we understand by doing things so much faster is we understand better the flaws in the data. And the 2020 census, the Census Bureau went down this route of trying to protect the anonymity of respondents. And what they did to the data was really kind of atrocious. They mangled up the data at the small end. And we decided a few years ago that we need to find additional sources of data. So we are on this quest right now to make it so that if we see somebody carrying a hammer in Bozeman, Montana on a satellite image, we want to know what that guy's doing. Is he building a house? What's he doing? So we are moving away from the census geography down to the individual parcel and building. And our goal, obviously we'll never get there, is that when there's a new house, wherever it is, that we know about it. And we know about it quickly. So what we're hoping to achieve is that the gap between when development occurs and when we have it in our database is shortened. And so, we're looking at ways of trying to pick up when those developments are going on, because those become very important in understanding, at a trade area level, whether or not a location is going to work or not. And it can be, signs of development going on. And we want to make that systematic across the country. Right now, if you want to know that, you have to hire somebody local who then goes into the various local data sets. We're trying to pull that all together. So, it's kind of an ambitious thing, but we want to get to the point where we're not reliant upon kind of the old models of demographic change. We want to get to ground truth and integrate those models to it. So that's kind of...
It is ambitious. I also think it is the most obvious next step for you, your team, and your skill set. That there's not a lot of people that we could put on that project besides you. You know what I mean? And like this is the surface and underpinning of all retail decisions. And so it's really important. I know you have some opinions on how you think about site selection in the future. So how do you think about site selection and performance monitoring and how do you think it should change over the next couple of years?
I think one of the problems that kind of emerged was that early on we were basically catering to the retailers, and the retailers became very educated on looking at data. The commercial real estate world early on basically said, no, you don't need that. You need us with our individual expertise on neighborhoods and things like that. And the real estate industry was very early opposed to the use of data here. Over time, they kind of recognized, yeah, we got to get on board this. And I think what's happened is that many of the retailers are now relying upon the commercial real estate world to tell them. The problem is that real estate broker, their interest level is there only until the property is leased. Right? They don't have any skin in the game, if you will, about whether that retailer does well down the road or not. And in fact, if you look at it, they have a disincentive for them to do well because they want to lease that property again and get their commission again. Right?
Oh, yeah, the individual leasing agent. Now,
Yeah,
maybe the property owner doesn't have that incentive because there's turnover costs and they're going to lose NOI on that, but the leasing agent only makes money when they lease a site.
right. And I think that the retailers have, to a certain extent, abandoned their responsibility for making sure that these sites work for them. They've allowed the brokers to control the information flow.
Hmm.
Property owners, it's a little bit different. The companies who specialize in owning properties that get leased out, they always have their own teams. But increasingly, what I've seen is the retailers will show up and it's a report from one of the brokers. Is that broker finding them the best site? No, they're finding what they've got in inventory. And I think the retailers have to kind of take over the space again and drive it, because retail is no longer about individual sites. It probably never was. But with the kind of marriage between brick and mortar retail and cyber retail, you have to pay attention to the fact that the best site may not be the best for the entity as a whole. The physical retail is often not advertising for the internet side, right? You have to have a certain critical mass within a metropolitan area so that people know your brand name. Those sites don't all have to be the best. You have to minimize the number of sites to get the coverage that you need in order to drive the brand awareness, internet and brick and mortar. And some of the kind of consulting companies out there have really started to dive into omni-channel marketing, or whatever fancy term that they're using for it. But it's really getting at the retailer as a whole, not looking at just one aspect of their business, like this particular site. The site location world is still oriented towards single site. Click on the map, get a report. It needs to reorient itself to, all right, how many sites do you need in this market? And where should they go to optimize, not necessarily sales at the brick and mortar, but to optimize our total sales? Where those total sales, a lot of them don't rely on the brick and mortar. And I think the internet has made internet shopping has made the physical retail a much more complicated world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
often as not, these retailers, they have two separate divisions. Right? They've got their internet shopping division, they've got their brick and mortar. And they view themselves as competing.
Yes.
They need to view themselves as part of the same organism. They each perform different functions, but the organism can't survive unless they both work. And so instead of competing with each other, they need to kind of unify into that overall strategy. Location, physical location, is an important part of it. So call it, in the economist terms, it's necessary but not sufficient. And as long as they don't bring those two together, I think retail is going to struggle.
That is absolutely mind blowing to me. And you're so right. The site location industry and model is designed to optimize sales at a singular site. And that's missing at its surface level. We're not optimizing necessarily sales for the brand in a
Right.
geography, but even more importantly, not necessarily optimizing for sales for the brand in total, including e-commerce sales. And I love how you're thinking of these things as billboards. So what if our question is no longer how do I pick the highest performing site? What if the question is how do I optimize for the overall health and sales of the brand? Which, as you're saying, it may be more complicated. I don't know. Like, I mean, think about this more. It also might be more simplistic way of looking at it if we could actually have models for how these two things connect. That is absolutely fascinating way of thinking about it. I don't think anyone's thinking about it like that.
Oh no, there are some companies who are doing that.
Hmm.
It's still at a point though where it's consulting based instead of things which the smaller guys can afford.
Well, what are the mechanisms for doing that? Like, I don't know. I can't see a different future where someone can bring these two things together. How do you do it?
I don't know that we're there yet to where I could
Hmm.
answer. But some of the things that a few of our channel partners are working on and that they do as a regular course of business is it's network oriented, right? So it's not here is my current network, find me the next best site. It's here's my current network. If I wanted to maximize my overall performance, where are the next three? Right? And that's going to yield different results than the
Hmm.
one at a time, find me the next one.
Yes.
Um, and, so I think people are doing it. The mathematical models are there, but now it becomes an education problem again. We're always back to that, where the more complex that we get, the more that we have to invest in educating the people who not only use the models. I mean, one of the big disconnects that occurs is that somebody will subscribe to a site location system. They never use it. They get some assistant to run it. They never get the full impact of looking at that map and looking at a potential service. The analyst might get that, but what they've been told to produce is what's the demographics for these 8 sites? And so the decision makers are not sufficiently kind of immersed in the data to change their mindsets about
Hmm.
how they're doing it. That'll come. As these tools get quick and easy to use and easy to understand, I think you're going to see a shift where the retailer is going to start taking over their futures again, um, much more than they have in the past. I've seen far too many companies that they end up being driven by making choices on what data they expect to see that may not even be right. And so the ones who say that they're completely data driven, I'm always suspicious of.
Hmm.
It's that probably means that you're missing opportunities, and you're probably choosing places that aren't as good as they could be. So I've always been a when the term data scientist started coming out, I would just laugh at it. And I'd laugh at it because I think those of us who've been doing this a while recognize that the artistic side of this probably outweighs the data side. I like it when I hear somebody say that they're a data artist. They craft the data in order to use it. So many times we've seen companies come and go that basically, even before they started calling it data science, there were companies that showed up and said, we've got this nifty new tool, and just trust us, it works. And maybe it does for a while, and it works until the day that it doesn't. And the company makes a bad decision based on this tool, and they go back to them and they say, well, why didn't it work? And they go, well, we don't really know because it's a black box.
Hmm.
And, I've always thought that you needed the human intelligence to make sure that you're not making a poor choice, because the machine will
it's
happily
almost
figure it out.
It's almost counterintuitive to hear a geographer and demographer that's as deep into statistics as you say that, like put the weight on art. But I think that's maybe special about this industry, and it's one of the reasons I love it as the art and science comes together, because it's like you can get the data, but having boots on the ground really matters, and the human intuition matters because those people have a neural net in their head. And I think there are some industries that artificial intelligence and LLMs is specifically what I'm talking about here. They're totally being disrupted ground up. I think advertising is one of those, but I don't believe that is going to happen with this industry in particular because of that human intuition piece of that. And a lot of these things can't be quantified. Now you quantify nearly everything that is important to quantify about the market and the demographics around it, but there's obviously other things at play which you're acknowledging.
Yeah, and I think there is a real place for AI in our business. It really comes down to helping people interpret that data. One of the things that I've always seen, everybody has their 9-page report, and that 9-page report contains several hundred statistics. And you watch how somebody uses it, and they will look at their favorite ones, usually on page 1, and then they'll flip through it with kind of knowing eyes, and they'll flip through it, and they might hem and haw at a few things. The reality is that when they see a number like I don't know, percentage of households age 15 to 24 with high income, they don't know what to do with it. They see a number and it says 12.2%. Is that high? Is that low? Is it unusual? Is it not unusual?
Yeah.
And I think that where AI techniques come in is that you train the model to go looking for anomalies. In most cases, those anomalies don't matter to you, but at least you can show that person who's looking at the report what those are. And we've actually we've got a system in place right now where every time we do a data release, we run 100,000 locations, and it's call it a spatially stratified sample. We're using half of the block group centroids across the country, and we run radius areas from 1 to 25 miles. So we got this massive database that allows you to say, okay, is that 12.2% that we talked about, is that an unusual number?
Okay. It gives you a reference point.
Right. And where the machine comes in handy is it can wade through thousands of variables very quickly and say, okay, these are the 10 variables that are out of range, kind of like a lab report when you get it back from on your blood work, where it shows you what's out of range. We're not going to say that it's important or not. That's up to the individual circumstances of whoever the retailer is. But what we will say is this is a very unusual number. You should be aware of it. You're then free to look at it and go, well, it really doesn't matter, or no, that is a showstopper. Because what I've often come to realize is that you might have a site which on your core criteria looks great, but there's something lurking in there that's a site killer. And sometimes they don't even know what those are. But if you can highlight the things that are really out of range, one direction or the other, I think that you allow people to interpret those reports better. I think that the core of this is that we can spin out numbers at an incredible rate. We can drown you in numbers.
Yep.
If you don't know how to interpret them, it doesn't really matter to you. So I still think, in our early days, our big thing was educating users on how to use this stuff. 40 years later, our biggest challenge is educating users on how to interpret things. That hasn't changed. We got new generation of analysts looking at things, and you have to go back to square one with a lot of them. In this day and age where we've got so much data, take something like a drive time polygon. People will start to nitpick and go, well, I've driven that and it takes 12 minutes, not 11. Or they get down so deep in the weeds that they forget that what you're really trying to do is model behavior in the aggregate, which should exhibit some pattern, some logical pattern, with a whole mess of outliers in it, where people just don't behave the way that you would think, because their reasons have nothing to do with the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's just the nature of things. So many times you see people get lost in the minutia of demographic data. They'll say, well, we think that our trade area has to have an income of $68,452. And you go, why that? And it's like, well, we've run models and that's where we start to do well. And you go, well, what if there's error in those numbers? What if there's uncertainty? What if that neighborhood has the same, has your target income, but their mortgages are 20% higher than the neighborhood beside it?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, I think, well, I shouldn't say it this way, but I will, intellectual laziness on the part of the people looking at the data, where they don't ask enough questions about it. And the questions that they ask are sometimes the wrong ones, where, I'll give you a great example of that I've told many times over the years. This was at Urban Decision Systems, early 1990s. We had this client, and they were a good client, gas stations. And this guy was hopping mad because we said that there were 12 gas stations within the trade area. He went out and he enumerated them. So he literally drove every single street and said, no, you guys are wrong. There's 13. And at the time, we were estimating those we didn't have a list of where the gas stations were. So this was purely estimated. And my response was, well, that's pretty good. But he said, but you're wrong. And I said, let me ask you the one question that I think matters. And that is, does it change your business decision? And he's like, no. And I said, so why did you waste your time and mine in quibbling over this? I think the speed at which we can generate numbers gives people a false sense of accuracy and precision. And they need to step back and realize that what you're looking at is estimates, and they should be thought about as being fuzzy. right? If we say that there's 72,000 people in a trade area, it's somewhere in that zone. But if you're going to quibble over 5 or 10 people in that trade area, you're looking in the wrong place. You've got lost in the weeds, and I don't think that you're going to be successful in analyzing the data.
Yeah.
You're looking for trend and pattern, and I think most of us aren't trained very well in looking for pattern.
Yeah.
So they focus on individual numbers, and I think that can be a tragic mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, when someone, and it's so easy to do that, is like if you have a number that you feel like is important, or a number that in your real estate board your CEO is going to ask, then you're going to get focused on a particular number. I've been kind of thinking about what you're talking about as it relates to why people will make the wrong decisions, or look probably in the most in an inefficient way at a report. And I wrote down three things. One is you wrote down, you mentioned intellectual laziness. I do think that that could be something where you're just not looking into deeply. Another is expediency. I just
Yep.
like you got to get it done. And then there's an analysis paralysis thing that could happen. And the other one is headwinds against what the actual data is saying, which I do see this a lot, where you have a company that identifies their demographics or the segments that are buying their product,
Yep.
and it's not the demographics that they want to hear. And in particular, it's always the same thing. It's either a minority or a lower income demographic. And I think what happens in the CEO's mind or something is, okay, well, if these people don't have a lot of income as much as I want them to, what's my headroom of actually making money? And that's like bad news to them. But I feel for the people that have to take that. That's a burden to have to take that to upper level management and say, hey, our segments are not as high income as we thought.
Well, that's often the problem, where the people doing the analysis aren't the decision makers,
Mm.
and the decision makers have a set of preconceptions that may or may not match reality. And I'll tell you, this is a real story. This is back 1980s. Hudson's Bay Company in Canada, now defunct. They had a division called Zellers, and they asked us to build them some models to help them expand the chain. Well, they had this notion of who their customers were that didn't match reality. They thought that their customers were I think, probably more upscale than they actually were. We had access to their credit card files. So because Hudson's Bay, that was the era of shopping center credit cards, we had all the credit card data. And I can remember sitting in with the executive team of Zellers, and they're basically saying, you guys are wrong about who our customers are. Our customers are here, and you're telling us that they're something completely different. And I'm going, but we have your data. There is a gap here between who you want them to be and who they are. And if you continue to insist that they're who you want them to be, you're going to go bankrupt, because you're not catering to your actual customers. And it was a real challenge. It was one of those heated meetings where I finally said, look, we will formulate the model according to your wishes as to who the clients are, but I guarantee the model won't work. So how be we do this? And I remember I hastily wrote out a written contract. And I basically said, I, and underscore for the name, hereby agree that we are solely responsible for the results. And I pushed it across the table to him, and he just kind of stared at me. And he finally went, so we're that wrong? And I said, yeah. I said, you came to us obviously because you got a problem. You don't know what it is, but yet you insist on believing that your customers are somebody who they aren't. and ask us to solve your problem. We can't solve your problem until you will admit that your customers are different from what you thought they were. And their marketing, all of their marketing was aimed at a segment of the market that wasn't their customers. And I think that becomes a real challenge. And I know it's a real challenge in a lot of organizations where those senior management who make the decisions are misinformed about the data. Their perceptions are not in line. And so the poor analyst who has to go into the boss's office and go, yeah, look, this is not going to work because these aren't our customers, or this location, I know it's your favorite place, but it's not a good location for us. It then becomes a sales pitch that the analyst has to make. And a lot of analysts, they really don't want to be in that business, but that's what they have
Sure.
to do. They have to learn how to take all the data that they've assembled and present it in such a way that it's convincing to people. And I
Yep.
think all too often, the analyst gets roughshotted or bullied into agreeing with decisions that the data don't support. And I think there's always been a lot of that.
I think that as you think about like what makes you good as an analyst, there's a couple levels. Like level number one is your search for truth. Okay, so you got to get that. You got to get the truth. Level number two is your creativity around it. So how do I? Because you have to be creative in the way that you find the truth. Like sometimes, as you say, there's like not one obvious way to do something. There's like a couple different ways. The next is courage. Once you know the truth, like having the guts to be able to do it. And then the last one is communication, to be able to communicate it in such a way. And like where you have a problem as an analyst is when you get into courage, because you can get fired for that. And like that can be a problem. So you either have to put your head down and wait it out, or you have the courage and the ability to communicate some of that. And one of the things that I'm thinking about, and this, because I get to see the advertising piece of this, is actually the opportunity on the other side of facing the truth about who your customers are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is almost everybody wants their customers to be high income. Here is the problem with high income people. They're expensive to target. And the locations of those people are expensive to buy. And so what people don't see is there's a hidden opportunity when you find a lower income or a minority group that no one is targeting, so their cost per click are very low, and then no one wants to buy real estate in that area. So that is the opportunity. I think that's the opportunity, and I think people are going to more and more see that because people are getting squeezed at the top.
Yeah. Well, and the other problem, of course, is that there aren't enough of those people to go around.
Yeah.
That was the genius of Sam Walton, of course, with Walmart locating in downscale neighborhoods in small towns all over the country. They didn't come in, they didn't come into the LA area where I live now until probably 20 years ago. And they started at the fringes and they've worked their way into, so they started at the low end of the market and have expanded upwards. Whereas most companies, they want those best customers, highest dollars per customer that you can get. And the reality is that everybody wants them and there aren't enough of them to go around. So, that the companies that manage to find a niche have always done very well.
Yeah.
And will continue to. Their
So
danger point becomes when they now expand out of their niche. You don't know what you're going to find.
yeah.
Um, you go into a Walmart in parts of Southern California that are very upscale parts. They do very well. Had they started here, they wouldn't have.
Yep.
But we're in this exciting era where all of the things that we imagined doing but didn't have the data for, that data is showing up.
Yep.
So much of it is deeply, deeply flawed. And we jump on these new data sets like the mobility, the tracking your phones as if they are the holy grail. And we do it every time something new comes along. We glomp onto it and we go, oh, this is the best thing ever. And then we start to look at it, we go, well, no, it's got some pretty significant flaws. And the world goes from this euphoria when something new comes along to this very deep depression when they realize it's not what they'd hoped for.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets integrated into it in an intelligent manner. So instead of imagining that the mobility data will do everything you ever wanted and more, it becomes something that has its proper role.
Yeah.
And it's not what you'd hope for, but it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now that people are comfortable using this stuff and we recognize that there's serious sampling problems, you can overcome those. And so now the mobility data, instead of being the holy grail, is simply one of the tools that gets used. And increasingly it's used more intelligently. And as I've said to people, if there's ever a perfect data around that would solve all these problems, I don't want to live in that world. Because that means
Why
that
is that?
every single thought, every action that everybody takes is tracked and monitored.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to have data issues. And the real skill that the good data people have is that they can wade through all the garbage.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, Gary, and I know we've gone 2 hours on this, and this reminds me of you spent 2 hours with me after ICSC talking about retail site selection, among some other more deeper things, including theology, which I absolutely treasure and love that. I hope we get to do it again. I want to ask kind of a final question. What are some mantras or lessons that you've carried with you from the early days till now that guides what you do today?
Let me tell you a bit of a story from very early days. When Bill Goldstein hired me, he really didn't tell me what his expectations were. So I remember the first thing that I tried to do that really just fell flat on its face. And Bill said to me, "Hey, let's go next door." Next door was the Madison Avenue pub, so it was in the University District of the city. And I'm thinking, man, I'm gonna get fired because I really messed this up. And instead, he goes, "I'm not paying you enough." I went, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, you need a raise." And I directly approached it. I said, "Look, I just screwed up big time in front of a client." And he said, "Gary, you're a home run hitter. If you hit 300 and strike out, so you get 3 hits and you strike out 7 times, I win. Don't ever stop swinging for the fence, no matter how often you strike out." And what Bill gave me was the confidence to fail. And I think small companies, we're not afraid to fail. I mean, every single project I've ever done is a failure until the day it isn't. But these big companies, they're so afraid to fail that they stop innovating. And I think the key thing that you have to have is a willingness to fail. Otherwise, you're going to do all the safe things and you're not going to expand what we're doing at all. I think it's through those failures that you actually learn how to create something that's better. Because once in a while you get it right, goes over the fence, and you go, "Oh, okay, I'm going to try that again." And it's something that I really tried to instill in our company, is this willingness. Just try it. Nobody's gonna go, "Oh, you failed. We're gonna take you back and you know, that'll be the end of you." Failure is a great thing. That's what makes it interesting.
Well, yeah, for sure. I'm thankful for Bill Goldstein to have taught you that lesson so that you could return that lesson to your team. And I think we would be sitting on a less interesting life and a less accurate industry in total had he not taught you to take those shots. So I'm thankful for that. Gary, this has been awesome. I think of you as a mentor to me and somebody I really look up to. So I'm thankful to spend this time with you. If people wanted to find out more about AGS, where would they go?
Well, our website is appliedgeographic.com, no S on it. We have a weekly newsletter that we do. You can sign up for that. You can take a look at our older articles on the blog page. Um, we tend to write some fairly controversial things. We're not afraid to offend people or ruffle their feathers. So I think if you read that, you'll find it interesting. You can always email any of us. We like to chat. We like to chat about data and models and methodology and how things work for you. And take a look at the website, take a look at the newsletter and the blog, and hopefully we'll hear from you.
Cool. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.